What did you do, human?
I fixed your station.
The princess had one knee on Arun Mehta's chest, a crescent blade under his jaw, when the deck began to sing. It was a low metal note at first, almost too deep to hear. Then it rose through the bones of the station and into his teeth. Above them, the suspended bridges of the war hall shivered on their chains. Below them, 600 meters down, the reactor light trembled blue and white through the open center of the shaft. Princess Sevrai felt it. He saw the change in her eyes before he saw it in the room. Her blade did not move, but her head turned a fraction, listening. Around them, the nobles in the galleries had stopped shouting. "Too late," Arun said, breathless. Her hair, silver banded with dark blue, lifted in the first hard pulse of vibration. "What did you do, human?" He bared his teeth, not quite a smile. "I fixed your station." 3 hours earlier, he had been on his knees with both hands inside an access panel, trying to keep an old disaster from becoming a new one. The station called Veyra's spear hung above the moon Ilia like a steel thorn. It had been a fortress once, then a customs post, then a palace after too many wars had spent themselves thin. Old structures never really stopped being what they were built to be. They only learned new disguises. Veyra's spear still thought in terms of recoil, impact, armor, and stress. Arun had spent 14 years listening to places like that. He knelt inside a maintenance crawl running along Dock 9 and pressed his fingertips against a braided support member, while the diagnostic unit on his wrist ticked through frequencies. The support cable was warm from load. Too warm. Every few seconds it gave back a faint, ugly flutter through the metal skin. Not one crack, many. He closed his eyes. A structural engineer learned to trust numbers. A good salvage engineer learned to trust the little animal in the spine as well. Behind him, beyond the service grill, freighter crews, porters, and armed retainers moved through the dock in braided streams. The air smelled of ozone, fuel oil, hot ceramic, and a spice he had never learned the name of. On the far side of the bay, the royal banners of House Sevrai hung in dark blue and silver from the curve of the station wall. Beneath them waited a line of long attack craft with folded fins and polished hulls. Too many for ceremony. Too clean for routine patrol. Arun slid back out of the crawl, wiped grease on his coveralls, and looked again. One of the craft had its weapon ports open while technicians fed in sealed racks. Missiles by the length of them, not defensive pods, strike ordnance. His contract on Veyra's spear was simple on paper. The Human Merchant Compact had agreed to finance repairs to the station's spin truss and docking spine in exchange for 10 years of guaranteed ore traffic from Ilia's mines. Arun had come with a civilian inspection team aboard the repair tender Meridian Wake to certify the oldest sections safe before the first convoy. The convoy was less than 4 hours out. If the station's lower truss failed under full dock load, Dock 9 would go first. The Meridian Wake was berthed there with 82 crew asleep, eating, or pulling light maintenance. If those missiles launched into a civilian convoy, the treaty died, and everyone in this system picked a side with guns. Arun stood up and went looking for the nearest officer he could trust. That turned out to be no one. Captain Sorrel met him at the security arch, tall and straight-backed in lacquered blue plates that left his forearms bare. The captain's skin was the pale blue of cold flame, and the 4 short braids behind his ears marked him as old nobility. He listened without expression while Arun explained the cracked support, the abnormal thermal rise, and the armed craft in a supposedly ceremonial dock. When Arun finished, Sorrel said, "You are a guest. I'm an engineer. You are a guest who mistakes his remit." Arun held his temper because anger was useless against men who enjoyed it. Your spin truss is accumulating fatigue faster than your records say it should. Somebody's been driving shock loads through the lower frame. If you launch a full squadron from 9 and fire the station lance on top of that, you could excite the whole southern fork. You want that in smaller words. Sorrel's lip curled the slightest amount. You smell treachery in every loose bolt. I smell a war prep hidden inside a repair job. At that, Sorrel's hand shifted nearer the sidearm at his hip. A better man might have stopped speaking. Arun had spent too many years pulling bodies out of failed hulls to be a better man in that particular way. "Show me the lance maintenance logs," he said. Sorrel stepped closer. "Return to your ship, human." The title came without his name. A small thing. In dangerous places, small things were warning lights. "Not until I speak to whoever actually commands this station." Sorrel smiled then, as if Un had finally told a good joke. "You will." He escorted Arun not to an office but to the Hall of Petitions, which was worse. The chamber sat in the broadest part of the central ring, a circle of tiered galleries wrapped around a hanging floor of black glass and silver lattice. Banners drifted in the ventilation currents. Musicians stood silent beside bronze drums the size of lifeboats. At the far end, on a dais under a vaulted canopy, sat Regent Veyra. Arun had met plenty of powerful men who dressed plain so the room could do the boasting for them. Veyra was not one of those men. His coat was a sheet of dark scales edged in silver, his collar pinned with old campaign medals, his hair wound tight with metal cords. His face was handsome the way a knife is handsome, clean, hard, and made for one purpose. At his right stood the woman from the banners. Princess Sevrai wore dark blue and silver as if the colors had been invented for her. Her outfit was cut for speed instead of modesty, armored at shoulder and hip, open across the belly, with flexible plates layered down her thighs. Her skin was pale blue, almost luminous under the hall lamps. Her hair fell long past her waist, silver through most of it but dark blue near the roots and beneath, like midnight under moonlight. She had the stillness of an athlete between motions. When Arun was brought in, her gaze dropped to the grease on his sleeves, then to his boots, then back to his face. He saw the dismissal land. Veyra spread one hand. "Master Mehta, my captain says you are troubled." "Your station is in danger," Arun said, "and so is the convoy inbound from the inner gate." A murmur moved through the galleries. Veyra did not frown. That more than anger would have made Arun uneasy. "Explain." So he did, briefly. Load paths, shock signatures, overheating truss members, launch preparations in a civilian bay, recent undocumented stress events. He kept it plain. He pointed at the attack craft visible through the open vault screens beyond the hall. He said the words weapon launch and lance calibration where everyone could hear them. By the time he finished, the room had gone thin and taut. Veyra let the silence stretch. Then he laughed. Not loudly, not for joy. He laughed the way a tutor humors a child who has misunderstood a story. Our human ally, he said, has discovered that an armed station possesses weapons. A few nobles laughed with him, relieved. Arun looked to the princess. Sevrai had not laughed, but she had also not changed expression. Veyra rose. The convoy approaches under our protection. The station is secure. As for the docked craft, House Sevrai honors the turning of the moon tonight with a martial review. My niece commands it. Now the room turned to her, and the subtle shift in posture told Arun what title mattered more than princess. Commander. This was her force. He looked back at the attack craft. Then someone has concealed from your commander that those launches will push a damaged support below tolerance. Sevrai's eyes narrowed. Veyra's did not, concealed. You don't have full maintenance access posted to civil engineering. You buried the lance logs, either because you didn't want panic or because you didn't want questions. Sarl took one step forward. The guards did the same. Arun heard himself crossing a line and did it anyway. If that convoy dies because your people are too proud to read a stress chart, I'll make sure every trade court from here to Mars hears whose hands were on the controls. That was not a wise thing to say in a warrior court. It was, unfortunately, a true thing. The first laugh this time came from Sevrai. It was quick and sharp and bright enough to cut. She stepped down from the dais with the lazy confidence of someone who had never in her life needed to hurry toward danger. The crowd parted for her. When she stopped in front of Arun, he had to look slightly up. There was no softness in her face, but there was intelligence and something harder to bear than contempt, amusement. You accuse a regent in his own hall, she said, with grease under your nails. With evidence, Arun said. You have suspicion. Humans mistake suspicion for depth. He almost answered, then saw it. Not just mockery. Performance. She was speaking for the room as much as to him. Whatever she really thought, she could not be seen taking a foreign civilian's side against her regent on the day of a military review. That did not make the knife edge any safer. She circled him once, as if judging a mount or a blade. You are the one who spent the morning tapping our bulkheads and listening to them. My captain said you looked like a priest blessing soup. A ripple of laughter spread. Arun said, your captain can't tell the difference between resonance mapping and prayer. That won him, one startled bark from somewhere high in the seats. Sevrai stopped in front of him again. And now you say, our house prepares murder. I say someone is. Her gaze held his for a long second. Then she turned, raised her voice, and said, if the dockhand speaks truth, let him prove it by our law. Give him the run of spears. The room came alive. Arun had no idea what the run of spears was, but by the sound it made in the crowd, he doubted it involved tea. Veyra lifted a hand as if reluctant. The falseness of it was almost elegant. "Niece, this is a guest. A guest who named us liars before witnesses." Sevrai's smile was blade-thin. "Let him stand by his courage." Arun understood then. This was how they buried a problem cleanly. Dress it in tradition. Turn an accusation into entertainment. "What is the run of spears?" he asked. Sevrai looked back at him. "You cross the lower stations unarmed. My hunters pursue. Reach the war hall and strike the gong before the review ends, and you earn the right to challenge my word before all who hear it. And if I do, then you die somewhere scenic and save us paperwork." The crowd liked that one. Arun looked at Veyra. Convenient. The regent spread his hands. "You asked for audience. My house grants more than audience. It grants proof." Arun's mind was racing. If he refused, he would be confined, perhaps quietly removed, while the convoy closed. If he accepted, he became prey inside a station whose faults only he seemed to care about. A bad choice and a worse one. Engineering had prepared him well for life. He said, "If I make it to the hall." Sevrai's eyes gleamed. "Then you may accuse me to my face before my whole command." "And if I win that too?" Laughter started before she answered. She gave them time to savor it. Then she raised her chin and said, loud enough for the rafters, "If you defeat me before witnesses, human, I will be your wife forever." The hall exploded. Arun stared at her, not because he believed the offer for a second, but because he understood exactly how perfectly she had reduced him in the eyes of her court. A foreign mechanic, a joke, a thing so beneath her that promising herself as prize cost nothing. He saw in her expression that she expected him to flinch. Instead he said, "Careful what you tie to a structural inspection." That got him silence first, then a few shocked laughs, then real noise. For the first time, one corner of Sevrai's mouth twitched for reasons not entirely contemptuous. Veyra struck the arm of his chair. "So witnessed, let the run begin." They gave Arun back his tool belt. That more than anything told him Sevrai had not meant him to die in the first 10 minutes. No weapons, no comms, no proper map, but Sarol's people returned the belt with his calibrated hammer, a diagnostic spool, a laser measurer, a pack of ceramic markers, and a pocket welder. A civilian's tools and therefore beneath suspicion. A technician could do little harm with those in the imagination of warriors. Warriors were often poor students of infrastructure. A gate dropped him into the Southern Service levels 2 decks below the public ring. Sirens began at once, not loud but directional, a hunting call echoing through long utility corridors striped with old hazard paint. Red lamps strobed. Somewhere overhead, spectators roared as his position lit across whatever tracking display the house had arranged for sport. Arun ran. The first corridor sloped with the station's curve, pulling subtly left as spin gravity changed. He passed sealed storage lockers, coolant trunks, emergency lockers hanging open and empty. The old station smelled different down here. Less perfume, more hot dust and machine oil. The honest smell of places that kept people alive. He slapped his wrist diagnostic against the wall as he ran. The unit chirped, reading density through the panel. Hollow space beyond. Vent shaft. A flash of movement behind him. He turned just enough to see the first hunter drop from an upper ladder well in a blur of blue armor and silver cords. Not Sorrel. Younger. Fast. Arun hooked the diagnostic spool onto a conduit bracket, fed line across the corridor at knee height, and kept moving. The hunter hit it 3 strides later and went down hard enough to ring the deck. Arun did not stay to see if he got up. He cut right through a maintenance hatch, dropped into a crawl barely wider than his shoulders, and pulled the hatch shut as a shock round scorched metal behind him. He belly crawled into heat and dark. The service map lived in his hands now. Dock spine below, spin truss ahead, central lift shaft somewhere up and inward. If he could reach the lower brace galleries, he might access the station's structural monitors directly. If Veyra had hidden the Lance logs, he had hidden them in central control. But the truss would tell its own story if Arun could get to the raw sensor feed. A clang behind him. The hunter had found the hatch. Arun wriggled faster, skin scraping metal, tool belt catching every other meter. Crawl narrowed, then opened abruptly above a vent well. He dropped the last 2 meters into a chamber full of ducting and rotating service fans. Hot air hit him in the face. He heard boots on the crawl above. No time. He crossed to the fan housing, slammed open the maintenance box and looked at the control tags. Old labels in 2 scripts. Manual override still where it should be. He killed the first fan, oversped the second, then jammed his ceramic markers into the balance slot. When the hunter dropped into the chamber, Arun was already at the far hatch. The fan screamed, shook itself apart, and threw a storm of shattered composite veins across the room. The hunter flung himself behind a duct as fragments punched holes through plating. One piece cut the door seal beside Arun's ear. He spun through the hatch and dogged it behind him. The next corridor was narrower and colder. He ran bent over through drifting vapor until his boots splashed into a thin film of condensation. The floor had developed a slight rhythmic tremor. There the bad note again, not imagination. He put a hand on the wall as he ran and felt the beat. Once every 4 seconds, a secondary oscillation, small but growing. "You old idiot," he muttered to the station. "What have they been making you do?" A junction opened ahead into a circular shaft with ladders and mag rails spiraling upward. 3 routes. Left descended toward cargo mass, right toward life support, up toward the brace galleries. He went up. A bolt of blue light flashed past his shoulder and shattered the ladder rung above his hand. Arun jerked sideways, lost purchase, and fell 6 meters onto a service platform. Pain shot through his right ankle. He bit back a shout, rolled, and saw Sorrel himself looking down from the opposite spiral, shock lance leveled. "Enough," the captain called. "You have entertained the hall." Arun pushed up onto one knee. "Your regent is going to kill your own people." Sorrel fired again. Arun slapped the platform release lever he had been hoping was live. The whole section dropped. Sorrel's shot went wide as the platform fell 2 decks on emergency rails, slammed, rebounded, and threw Arun into a wall. The impact burst white behind his eyes. By the time his vision steadied, he was in a lower access band with alarms howling around him, and the captain nowhere in sight. His ankle held when he stood, barely. He limped through a hatch marked truss access, authorized personnel. The lock panel was old, too old. He popped it with the pocket welder and went inside. The brace gallery was a cathedral turned on its side. Bundles of tension members ran in paired arcs through the open framework, disappearing into darkness in both directions. Thick anchor nodes the size of houses sat at intervals along the spine, each webbed with sensors, hydraulic tensioners, and manual service ladders. Through the gaps in the structure he could see the moon below, a gray-white curve banded with city lights, and beyond it the cold scatter of ships waiting on approach. The convoy. Tiny now, bright as nails in velvet, too close. Arun crossed to the nearest node, ripped open the inspection cover, and hardlined his wrist unit into the sensor bank. Data rolled. His pulse climbed with it. The lower fork wasn't merely cracked. It had been driven repeatedly at near-resonant impulse, deliberately. Lance discharge calibration, yes, but not just that. The attack craft in Dock 9 had been test-spooling launch cradles in sequence, hammering the same frequency back through the support web. Somebody had been seasoning the structure like a butcher tenderizing meat. He called up firing permissions. Locked out. He called actuator health. Several restraint pins on the ventral lance mount had been withdrawn to maintenance position and never reset. He stared. If the lance fired under full review conditions, recoil could rip the entire southern dock cluster loose. Not the whole station. Worse, in a way. A partial failure would look like attack damage. Panicked ships would return fire. The war Veyra wanted would begin under a fog thick enough to hide his fingerprints. Arun started an emergency broadcast anyway, routing through civilian maintenance channels. This is Arun Mehta, structural lead from the Meridian Wake. Any ship on approach, break from current vector. Repeat, break from. The feed died. Sorrel had found the local circuit and cut him off. A shadow crossed the lattice above. Arun disconnected, turned, and saw not Sorrel but Sevrai on the upper ladder, looking down at him through the web of steel. She was alone. So, she said, you ran farther than I expected. Arun did not bother hiding his anger. Congratulations. Her gaze flicked to the open node. What did you find? He laughed once harshly. If you don't know, your house deserves the crater. Something changed in her face. Not softness. Offense, perhaps, that he had managed to wound Rat. Her than merely resist. Speak plainly. Your regent has your attack craft cycling synchronized launch drills into a damaged truss. Your ventral lance mount is half released. If he fires on the inbound convoy during this review, the southern docks tear open. My ship dies first, your civilians next, and everyone calls it human treachery because no one left alive will know better. She came down the ladder in 3 fluid drops and crossed the brace node toward him. Up close, her breathing was steady from the hunt, her eyes cold and alert. She smelled faintly of metal and the resin they used in their fighting leathers. "You lie well for a mechanic," she said. He spun the wrist display toward her. For a second she only looked because pride required it. Then she actually read. Arun watched the moment she understood one number, then a second. "That lockout code," he said, "wasn't set by civil maintenance. It was set by command authority." Sevrai looked up from the screen slowly. "Veyra. He wants your convoy fired on from your station. Maybe he thinks war saves his faction. Maybe he thinks peace makes him small. I don't care. But your review is the trigger." A pulse of distant drums rolled through the structure. The martial review was moving toward the war hall, time collapsing. Sevrai's jaw set. "If this is true." "It is true." She met his stare, and for the first time since he had seen her, there was no audience in her face, no performance, only decision. Then a shock bolt burned past her shoulder and burst against the node housing behind them. Sarol's voice rang through the gallery. "Highness, stand clear." Sevrai turned with lethal slowness. Sarol stood on the upper catwalk with 4 soldiers fanned behind him. "Your regent wants me dead," Arun said. "Question is whether he told you." Sarol said, "The human has tampered with critical systems. By order of the regent, he dies now." Sevrai did not step aside. The captain's expression tightened. "Highness." That was answer enough. Arun moved first, because standing still under aimed weapons offended every useful instinct he possessed. He seized the inspection cover, solid alloy shoulder-wide, and heaved it toward the catwalk. Sarol's soldiers flinched. Sevrai drew and moved in the same instant, one blade in each hand, leaping onto the diagonal bracing like gravity was advisory. The gallery exploded into motion. Arun dove behind the node as shock rounds hammered sparks from metal. Above him, boots rang across grating. Sevrai hit the first soldier halfway down the support web, cut his weapon free, kicked him into open air, and used the recoil of her own body to swing to the catwalk rail. Sarol met her there with a long knife and an elbow strike that would have dropped most men. She was not most men. Steel flashed. Arun saw only fragments as he crawled to the auxiliary panel on the node's far side and ripped it open. A manual tensioner wheel, hydraulic bypass, emergency brace actuators. Not a weapon good enough. He cranked the bypass open 2 turns. A nearby support member snapped inward by 10 centimeters with a scream of loaded steel. The entire catwalk lurched. 2 of Sarol's soldiers lost footing. One went over the rail. The other caught himself with both hands, dangling above the reactor void. Sarol shouted something sharp and alien. Arun stood and threw his calibrated hammer. It struck the shock lance in the captain's left hand just as Sarol turned. The discharge blew sideways into a tension cable. Light burst. The cable parted with a gunshot crack. Now the whole gallery moved. Bracing recoiled. Catwalks twisted. Alarm klaxons went from warning to panic. Through it all Arun heard that same deep note rising, clearer now. The structure was already closer to resonance than it had any right to be. Sevrai landed beside him, caught him by the front of his coveralls, and shoved him flat as a sliver of sheared composite scythed through the air where his head had been. "We go to the hall," she said. He stared at her. "That's your plan." "That is where Veyra will fire the lance and where all witnesses stand. If I accuse him in a service crawl, he kills us and names us saboteurs. If I accuse him before the house, he must either answer or show his hand." Another bolt scorched past. Sorrow was coming again, blood at one temple, murder in both eyes. Arun got to his feet. "Fine, but if the lance charge starts before we get there, your haul becomes scrap." Sevrai's expression said she knew. They ran. The fastest route inward passed through old maneuver sections the palace architects had left half hidden behind silk and reputation. Sevrai knew them. Arun knew structures. Between those two forms of literacy, they stayed alive. They crossed a low-gravity transfer tube with Sarol's soldiers on their heels, and the moon rotating slow and huge through the transparent curve beside them. Arun shot the tube's maintenance foam into the sole. Ease of one pursuing guard's boots as he jumped. The man landed stuck, cursed, and became an obstacle for the two behind him. Sevrai took the next corner in a slide, slashed a coolant line, and sent an entire passageway into blinding white vapor. At a locked pressure iris, Arun overrode the seal while she held the junction alone. He heard her fighting rather than watched it, the hard ring of blade on armor, the short, vicious breaths, one man screaming exactly once. When the iris opened, he dragged her through by the wrist and dogged it behind them. Blood, hers or someone else's, striped one bare forearm. "You're wounded," he said. "Not importantly." "Good system." She gave him a look. "All your jokes arrive late." They cut upward through the ceremonial lift shaft as drums thundered somewhere above. The sound mattered. Each beat ran through the frame. At first Arun thought it was only his nerves sharpening against the structure. Then he stopped dead halfway up a maintenance ladder and pressed his palm to the spine. Sevrai 3 rungs above looked down. "Move." "Wait." Below them the shaft plunged into dark. Above, the war hall glowed through layered grills like a furnace door. Arun felt the pattern again. Drum, echo, drum, echo, not random. The hall's great bronze drums were mounted directly to decorative braces tied into the old southern fork. "They're driving it," he said. "What?" "The drums, your review music, the lance calibration, the launch cradles, all at nearly the same frequency." He looked up through the grill as another deep ceremonial beat rolled through the shaft. Veyra doesn't just want the lance fired. He wants the failure dramatic. Sevrai's face hardened. Arun's mind had already leapt ahead, chasing lode paths and modal shapes through the station's skeleton. He had mapped the southern fork. He had seen the half-withdrawn restraint pins on the ventral mount. He knew where the hall chains anchored and where the brace galleries fed into the lance collar. "You can make it worse," she asked. "I can make it choose." That made her pause. He climbed fast now, talking as he moved because she needed just enough. If I can push the structure into the second mode instead of the first, the energy goes into the hall suspension and lance collar, not the living ring. The war dock tears off, the lance yaws, civilians live. And us. He considered that with more honesty than diplomacy. Mixed outlook. Her teeth showed. It might have been a grin. They entered the underside of the war hall through a service grill and into thunder. Above them hung the black glass dueling floor, suspended by 8 great chains and an intricate lattice of silver struts. Galleries rose in rings on every side, packed with nobles, soldiers, servants, and spectators. Blue and silver banners thrashed in the air currents. The bronze drums boomed from alcoves around the rim. At the far dais stood Veyra, one hand raised to quiet the room. He saw them emerge. The surprise on his face lasted no longer than a blink. Then it was gone, buried under practiced outrage. "Niece," he called, amplified through the hall. "Stand from the saboteur." Thousands turned. A hiss moved through them like gas escaping. Sevrai climbed onto the lower catwalk and drew herself up to full height. "You ordered the Southern Truss driven past tolerance," she shouted back. "You locked the lance records and set the ventral mount for release." Veyra did not deny it. Clever. Denials can be disproved. Instead, he spread his hands to the crowd. Listen to him. Listen to how quickly human poison becomes family discord. He beguiles, then blames. The crowd was wavering, not convinced but primed. Arun saw the main charge indicator bloom to life above the dais, a ruby bar filling. "He's charging it now," Arun said. Sevrai heard and made her choice in the span of a breath. She vaulted the rail, landed on the black floor before the whole house, and pointed one blade at Veyra. "Then let the proof be by combat," she said, "as witnessed." He smiled sadly, as if pained by necessity. "As witnessed." Arun understood a beat late. The run of spears was never about reaching the hall. It was about reaching this. A formal contest in which law, spectacle, and murder could become the same event. Veyra's gaze slid to him. The human accused my house. He claimed victory over its commander. Let him finish what he boasted. Sevrai turned toward Arun just enough for him to catch the warning in her eyes. She could not refuse without ceding the ground that made Veyra vulnerable. Not before witnesses. Not now. So the joke became real. Sorrow came limping into the hall with fresh guards at his back and blood drying on his cheek. He took position below the dais, one hand on a command panel. Arun stepped out onto the hanging floor. The black glass gave underfoot a little more spring than stone. He felt the chains taking load above, the slender SW. Eye of the platform over the reactor shaft. Good. Movement meant leverage. Across from him, Sevrai lowered into guard. Long blades, light feet, no wasted motion. She looked like everything his body did not want to fight. "You can yield," she said quietly, too low for the galleries. "And then I might keep you breathing another minute." The charge bar above the dais kept climbing. Arun flexed his sore ankle and measured distances. 8 anchor chains, 4 drum alcoves on this side, dais connected by two narrow bridges. The main hall braces ran just under the floor, accessible at the outer edge if he could get there. "No offense," he said, "but I've had mixed results trusting your time estimates." Then she came for him. He had been in fights before. Doc saw to that. None of them had involved anyone this fast. Her first slash opened his sleeve. The second nearly took his ribs. He backed, turned, used the flex of the floor to throw off her rhythm. She cut high, low, then reversed the offhand blade in a motion so smooth it felt prewritten. Arun caught her wrist with both hands, redirected the edge, and got a knee into her thigh before she tore free. The crowd roared. He was not going to beat her by pretending to be her. He retreated toward the outer arc, giving ground in deliberate lines, forcing her to pursue across parts of the floor already humming harder than the rest. Each footfall told him something. Here the support was stiffer. There it answered with a delayed tremor. The southwest quadrant was taking more of the induced load, exactly where the lance collar tied in below. Sevrai saw him glancing down, still listening to the floor. "It talks a lot." She drove him back with a flurry that sliced his shoulder and sent him stumbling to one knee. Pain flashed hot. She could have opened his throat then. Instead, she paused the smallest fraction, maybe to keep the duel credible, maybe because some part of her still wanted witnesses more than blood. That fraction saved him. Arun slammed the calibrated hammer into the deck strut beside him. The note that came back was so pure he felt it in his lungs. Sevrai's head snapped toward the sound. He hit the same strut again, harder, then rolled under her next cut and came up running for the outer brace. Veyra shouted. Sarol's hand hit the command panel. The bronze drums around the hall changed cadence at once. Arun almost laughed despite the terror. Of course, Veyra had built a whole ceremony around the frequency. He reached the edge rail, kicked off it, and dropped to the maintenance lip beneath the dueling floor just as shock fire streaked through the air above him. The crowd screamed. Sevrai landed on the rail and looked down. "Tell me you have a plan," she said. "I have a profession." He pulled the diagnostic spool free, looped it around the exposed tuning brace, and jammed the line into the pocket welder's power feed. It wasn't elegant. It only needed to last seconds. He set the welder to pulse and clipped the handle open with a bloody thumb. The brace began to chatter. Not enough. Sarol was moving along the bridge toward him with 3 guards. Above them, the charge bar reached 3/4. Sevrai looked from Arun to Sarol to the dais. Then she jumped not at Arun but at her captain. The first guard died before he knew the target had changed. The bridge became a knot of bodies, blades, and blue-white discharges. Sevrai fought like a storm stripped down to method. Sarol met her in the center, and the two of them hammered each other against the rail, while the remaining guards tried not to kill their own commander in the crossfire. Arun kept working. He needed a stronger impulse, something periodic, something big. The drums. He looked up at the nearest bronze barrel in its alcove above the outer gallery. Its striker arm rose and fell by mechanical linkage, timed from the command panel. if he could alter just one beat. He crawled along the lip under the gallery, ignoring the drop below until he found the striker control box. Old maintenance screws. Thank God for vanity preservation. He tore the cover open, reached in, and rerouted the timing lead through the welder pulse. Above him, the next drumbeat came a half-second late. The whole hall shuddered. Heads snapped up, people grabbed seats. Veyra barked an order. Arun rerouted a second line, then a third, offsetting the rhythm into the pattern he needed. Not random chaos, but a stepped climb aimed at the second harmonic he had calculated on the ladder. Drum. Pause. Drum, drum. Long pause. Drum. The platform began to sway. That was when Sevrai lost. Or seemed to. Sorrel caught her blade arm, drove a knife hilt into her ribs, and threw her hard across the black floor. She slid nearly to Arun's side of the hall. One of her swords spun away into the reactor dark. The crowd gasped as one body. Sorrel, bleeding from 3 cuts and moving like his left leg hurt, advanced. Ed for the kill. At the same moment, Veyra saw what Arun had done to the drum controls. He slapped the lance command. The charge bar flared white. The ventral lance fired. For one impossible instant, the whole station held its breath. Then the recoil hit the half-freed collar. The southern fork answered with a howl. Everything moved at once. The dueling floor jumped upward under Arun's hands. One of the great suspension chains snapped with a sound like the sky splitting. The war dock screens on the far wall burst into spray as armored attack craft tore loose from their cradles. Somewhere deep below, masts the size of buildings sheared free and began to fall away into vacuum. The hall tilted toward the reactor shaft. People screamed. Banners whipped loose. One of the bridge spans folded and dumped a dozen nobles into a lower safety net that tore 2 seconds later. But the living ring did not fail. Arun felt it in the pattern beneath the chaos. The load had jumped where he wanted it, into the hall suspension, the lance mount, the war dock collar. Destructive, yes. Fatal to Veyra's plan. Not yet fatal to everyone. Sorrel lunged over the buckling floor toward Arun. Arun got one arm up. The captain's shock lance struck the rail instead of his skull and welded itself there in a flare of light. Sorrel tore it free and swung the butt like a club. Arun took the hit on his shoulder and nearly went over the lip. Then Sevrai was there. She came in low, empty-handed now, caught Sorrel's wounded leg in a sweeping kick, and drove both of them onto the canted floor. They slid together toward the broken chain anchor. Sorrel punched. She blocked. He got his hands on her throat, and still the whole hall kept groaning around them like a beast trying to die standing. Veyra was retreating toward the command dais with 2 guards and a sidearm. Arun hauled himself up because no one else was close enough. The deck was now pitched so steeply he had to run diagonally to stay upright. He bounced off a rail, crossed the first narrow bridge as it twisted under him, and hit the dais just as Veyra turned and fired. The shot scored Arun's left side with a line of liquid heat. He went into the Regent anyway. They crashed through a display pillar and into the command panel. Veyra was stronger than he looked and trained enough to use it. He drove an elbow into Arun's jaw, caught him by the throat, and shoved him back against the live controls. "You stupid animal," Veyra hissed. "Do you know what peace does? It fattens merchants and rots houses. My people were rulers before your kind left its cradle." Arun got a hand on the man's wrist, the other on the edge of the console to keep from sliding off the tilted dais. "Your people," he choked out, "are still standing on a station you tried to break." Veyra snarled and reached for the secondary fire control. Arun saw the label, Emergency Lance Realignment. If the Regent dumped the remaining charge into the collar now, the whole southern frame might still go. So Arun did the least dignified and most effective thing available. He head-butted him. Cartilage broke. Veyra reeled. Arun slammed the calibrated hammer into the secondary control glass, once, twice, until the panel went dark and the Regent fell on him with murder in his face. They grappled at the very lip of the dais while the bridge behind Arun peeled away section by section. Veyra clawed for the fallen sidearm. Arun trapped the Regent's hand, felt his own boots slipping on shattered glass, and had one clean thought. Too much mass, no anchor. He let go of the hand and grabbed the Regent's collar instead, turning with the motion. It was a dockworker's move, not a duelist's. Use the other man's momentum. Redirect. Commit. Veyra pitched past him and hit the slanted edge of the dais chest first. For a heartbeat he balanced there, eyes wide less with fear than disbelief. Then the broken bridge tore free. The sudden release changed the angle under both men, and Veyra went over. He vanished into smoke, sparks, and the blue glare far below. Arun lay there panting for 1 second, maybe 2. Then Sevrai shouted his name. He looked. Sarol had recovered. Of course he had. Men like that always did until the universe got tired of them. He had one arm around Sevrai's neck, the other reaching for a dropped blade while the canted floor pulled them both toward the torn-open section where the chain had failed. Arun grabbed the sidearm Veyra had lost and fired once. He had never liked pistols. Too much power and too little geometry. The shot went wide. But it hit the chain tension release behind Sarol. The remaining link snapped open. The broken chain whipped across the floor like a steel serpent, caught Sarol around the back of the knees, and tore him loose from Sevrai. He disappeared over the edge with a shout that cut off before it finished. Silence did not follow. Alarms did. The war hall was D.N.G. One more chain had begun to stretch. Fire suppression foam hissed from ruptured lines. In the galleries, survivors were dragging one another toward the side exits while attendants struggled to get blast curtains down. Sevrai pushed herself up on shaking arms. "Can you walk?" "Yes," Arun lied. She got to her knees, looked once at the place where her Regent had gone, then at the failing hall around them. When she spoke again, command had come back into her voice like a drawn blade sliding home. "Then help me save what remains." That part took longer than the fight. There was no glory in it and no crowd left to clap. Arun and Sevrai split because there was no other choice. He limped through 3 emergency nodes, using stripped cables and his patched diagnostic unit to cycle surviving bulkheads and isolate the failing hall from the residential ring. Twice he had to crawl under partly collapsed struts while the station still shivered around him. Once he found a child pinned under a decorative beam and cut the metal away with the pocket welder until his hands blistered through the gloves. Somewhere else in the wreckage, Sevrai was rallying stunned guards, ordering medical teams, forcing nobles to carry stretchers if they still had the arms for it. Every few minutes her voice came over the emergency speakers, rower each time but steady. Seal Corridor Red, Vent Dock 9, cut power to review craft, get the outer ring clear. By the time the last of the war dock debris drifted free, and the station settled into an ugly but survivable new equilibrium, the convoy had broken approach and was holding at safe distance. The Meridian Wake still existed. That was enough to make Arun sit down hard against a bulkhead in a corridor full of emergency lights and close his eyes for several seconds. When he opened them, Sevrai was standing over him. She had lost one blade, the other hung sheathed at her back. Blood had dried dark down one side of her outfit. Her long silver and blue hair was half out of its bindings. She looked less like a princess now than what she probably had been before titles found her. A fighter who had survived the day and would count the cost later. "The convoy is safe," she said. "So is your station," Arun answered. "Parts of it. Best kind of safe, in my experience." As she studied him, "You were shot." "Only along the parts I usually keep on the outside." One slow breath left her, almost a laugh. Around them, stretcher teams moved past without pausing. News traveled faster than medicine. More than one soldier looked at Arun with frank uncertainty, as if trying to fit mechanic, saboteur, and savior into the same pair of boots. Sevrai lowered herself to sit across from him, back against the opposite wall. For a little while neither of them spoke. The corridor hummed with emergency power and far-off metal settling into new loads. At last she said, "I spoke in mockery before the house." Arun turned his head. "I noticed. My words were witnessed." He understood then that this mattered to her in a way it would not matter to most humans, not as flirtation, as oath, as public architecture of the self. He said carefully, "I didn't fight to own anyone." Her eyes sharpened, but not in anger. "I know that now." He looked at the floor between them. "Good." Sevrai rested her forearms on her knees. "Among my people, an oath made before witnesses binds honor, not flesh. When I said I would be your wife forever if you won, I meant there was no world in which you could win. That is my shame, not yours." Arun let that settle. She went on, quieter. "Today you accused power in its own hall. You survived when wiser beings would have bent. You understood what our station was saying when my own commanders heard only drums. And when victory placed me beneath your hand, you did not close it." He almost told her he had been too busy bleeding to make a moral philosophy out of it, but the line felt cheap and untrue. He had not closed it. That counted. "So what happens now?" he asked. Now I testify before the convoy, the trade court, and every surviving officer that Veyra prepared an unlawful strike and murdered his own house to regain a war his generation misses. She held his gaze. And now I keep faith with the words I used to dishonor you. Arun rubbed a hand over his face. Sevrai. She smiled then, not the bright cutting smile from the hall, something smaller, human almost except for the blue skin and the iron in it. You are about to say that marriage should not be payment for a duel. That was very close to the sentence. It is a sound sentence. She tipped her head. Then let us learn from your people as well as mine. Ask when you are ready, refuse if you are not. But do not ask me to pretend I did not speak before witnesses or that what happened between us is nothing. Footsteps approached. Medics finally. Sevrai stood before they reached them and offered Arun her hand. He took it because he needed the help, and because it seemed stupid not to. She pulled him to his feet with insulting ease. At the corridor junction, she paused and looked back toward the ruined heart of the station. Her face went still again, though not empty, reframed. In the hall, she said, when the deck sang under your head, were you afraid? Arun thought about lying, decided against it. Yes. Her grip tightened once approvingly. So was I, she said. That is how I knew you were telling the truth. Weeks later, after the dead were named and the convoy captains had given their statements, and the first legal teams began circling the wreck of Veyra's spear like scavengers around a respectable corpse, Arun stood in Dock 9 and watched repair crews replace the first of the ruined braces. The Southern Fork would never be elegant again. He preferred it that way. Elegant structures encouraged vanity. Ugly repairs reminded people to pay attention. The Meridian Wake was loading out. New contracts, new systems. Disaster in civilized space was excellent for business. A shuttle settled onto the dock with a hiss of equalizing seals. Its hatch opened. Sevrai came down the ramp without guards. She wore no court armor now, only a travel coat in dark blue over simple silver field gear, hair braided back for work. She carried one duffel over her shoulder and a case long enough for a sword or a rifle. Arun met her halfway, trying and failing to ignore the strange stutter in his chest. You came alone, he said. I thought about bringing a choir and 3 legal scholars, but your species already seems nervous around me. That was considerate. I practice. She stopped in front of him and looked up at the half-rebuilt dock spine, at the new braces gleaming against old scarred metal. You made them change the load routing. You noticed. I listen to floors now. He laughed. It hurt less than it had a week ago. Then the laugh faded, because she was standing very near and neither of them had audience enough to hide behind. I can't offer forever, Arun said. Not because of a bet, not because you said something cruel in a crowded room. Sevrai nodded once. Good. I can offer dinner on a repair ship with bad coffee and a view of your station's worst decisions. At that her whole face changed. Surprise first, then delight she tried and failed to disguise as dignity. This, she said, is a very human counterattack. It's what I've got. She considered him with ceremonial seriousness for a full 2 seconds. I accept. He glanced at the duffel. What's in the bag? My things. For dinner. For the part after, if the coffee is persuasive. Arun stared at her. She enjoyed that for exactly the length of one breath before relenting. And also, she said, touching the case by her leg, a formal record of my testimony, a copy of the salvage ruling granting you advisory authority over the reconstruction, and the sword I owe the man who won it. I didn't know I won a sword. You won several inconvenient things. Seems to be a pattern. Sevrai stepped beside him and looked out through the dock mouth toward the moon, the convoy lights, and the great wounded station that had almost become a grave for them both. When I mocked you, she said, I thought humans were dangerous only when gathered behind trade, numbers, and machines. Arun followed her gaze, and now. She turned her head, silver and blue braid brushing the shoulder of her coat. Now I know, she said, that a single patient human with a tool belt can be a strategic event. That more than praise would have made him smile. Together they walked toward the Meridian wake, while behind them the repaired braces of Dock 9 held, and held, and held.